Welcome to MSP TechHowTo, your go-to place for easy-to-follow tech tutorials. My name is Chris, and on this channel, we will break down common technical problems, guide you through step-by-step solutions, and review the latest must-have technologies in the MSP space. Click on the subscribe button below and stay updated with all things in the MSP space. Today, we're going to go through some common Junos-based commands to do basic maintenance on pretty much any Junos-based devices, but more commonly, the devices you probably run into the field are going to be SRX-based security firewall appliances. So we'll go through some of the things that you should be doing anytime you're making changes to the platform, doing software upgrades, etc. So let's get started. First thing we'll go through is some basic commands like storage cleanup. This is something that you should do anytime that you're going to be doing a software upgrade, right? So we'll run through running the command request system storage cleanup. You'll notice that I am using the tab for autocomplete, very handy in Junos. And this will purge through, go through the system, purging out any kind of older log files, maybe some older snapshots, things like that from the platform to make sure you've got the appropriate free space. And the next section we're going to talk about is related to configuration management. There's a lot of things that fall into that category, but I'm going to focus on just a couple of key things. As you make changes to the platforms, it's important to not just back up those configuration settings, but to do so in the product itself. In the SRX series, there's internal configuration management we can utilize to make sure that if there's a boot failure or even a configuration error that we cause ourselves, that we can easily recover from that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set what's called the rescue configuration, and that's done with the simple command of request system configuration rescue save. And what this does is it creates a special configuration file that can be called up in certain scenarios. It'll be called up into some boot failure scenarios, but you can also, if let's say you make a configuration change and you cause with that change that the system's no longer operating right, like you can't communicate with it, you lost access to it, etc. You can call up that rescue config to basically roll back to your last known good configuration state to automatically roll out those issues. So it's important to continually update that rescue configuration as you manage the device. Another function is called the recovery state. This is think of it kind of, we're going to talk about snapshots in a minute, but basically it's a state data that the system will record that will include the configuration rescue file. And if the system were to fail to, say, to boot properly at startup, it'll call into this recovery state setting to bring in whatever it needs to try and boot properly, including configuration settings. And that command is request system auto recovery state and save. I can't run it in this example because I'm actually working from a virtual SRX platform that doesn't support that particular command. But all the typical SRX 300 branch series that you'll see in the field, these are all applicable to. All right, so let's talk a little bit about snapshots now. So just as important as managing configuration changes, it's also just as important to maintain snapshots. And again, in those 300 series firewalls, the most common command that you're going to want to run, again, after any major configuration changes, is called request system snapshot slice alternate. And again, this is not supported on the platform I've got here. But basically what that does is on the SRX 300 series, there's actually two boot partitions, a primary and a backup. Normally the system boots off the primary. And so when you're operating off primary and I issue this command of snapshot slice alternate, it's going to actually take the current state of the primary partition and write it into the alternate backup partition. And the reason this is important to do as a daily maintenance thing when you're making changes is that will include the latest version of the configuration files from the primary partition. If you don't do this and you end up booting off of that backup partition at some point, you're going to be booting with an old configuration. Could be very old, and it could also be a very old software version, because again, the software is a part of that boot partition. So it's very important to maintain these snapshots, and when you do firmware changes and configuration changes. Another good habit to do is, as an alternate, an additional step, I would say, as a snapshot, is to external media. So you can plug a USB thumb drive into the front of those SRXs, and I can issue that same snapshot command to create a bootable image off of that USB drive. Now, as practice, we do this for our customers, and we leave that USB drive on the rack with the equipment. That way, if there's some kind of major boot failure, we can at minimum plug that flash drive in and get the system back up and running and figure it out from there. So to run that command, it's simply changing, instead of slice alternate as the destination, we're going to choose media and USB. And by issuing this command, it'll automatically detect the USB you've got plugged in. It'll repartition, reformat the USB drive, and make it a bootable file system for the SRX platform. And with that, that's all I've got for today. Stay tuned for some more videos and more interesting stuff. We're going to get into things like some detailed quality of service, class of service configurations. I'm also going to be posting a video about virtual routing tables, something that's a little less common, but something that we use in our practice quite frequently, especially for any customer that's got multiple internet sources. It's kind of a must-have for things to work really well. So stay tuned.